maybe we'll turn one down, we'll delay one and we'll issue the second one. Well, you try to tell an oil and gas company, you line up contractors, you have everything else, it just can't work that way. So there's going to be a lot of confusion until they straighten this out. This impacts lease positions and contractors, no question about it. The other thing is, I think we skipped one, didn't we?
Let's go back. There you go.
Well, where are we now? Well, the public comment period, as you know, closed December 12th. There were hearings in Marcellus area in New York City. There are discussions occurring with DEC on some of the issues that I just mentioned, and there are other issues. And I expected to see a lot of Florida local laws being passed in advance of the SGIS coming out. You might still see that, but we haven't seen that yet. Certainly, we'll expect some lawsuits on the SGIS, and then no drilling until probably late this year, and that may be optimistic.
What about permits? When do you think you get permits?
Well, that's what I'm talking about, permits. To get through the process, I kind of see a small number of companies trying to figure out how to get through the process, get through all the requirements that need to be done. It could take a year, it could take 2 years to get through the process. The industry has estimated it's an extra $1 million to drill a well in the state of New York versus Pennsylvania. So you've got a whole bunch of uncertainty, and as we've heard, if gas is at $2 and they're looking for liquids, they're already gone to Ohio and move south. So there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty that's occurring. Yes, sir?
Will having the majors help?
Yes. The majors, yes, having the majors, it will help because the majors have a different view of, they're almost like a farmer, like a mutual fund, that if they can continue to have their properties and they can churn out the process, they aren't afraid of regulation, and they aren't afraid of, not to say that this is good regulation, but they aren't afraid of spending money if they see a return at the end of the day, as opposed to an independent who needs an immediate return. That's the big difference. Go ahead, yes?
Before you go any further, maybe you can tell us, the quote in our local paper was attributed to Martin saying recently, still saying if they were going to allow horizontal drilling, not when they were going to allow.
Well,
is he just appeasing the other side with that language, or did he not really say that? Do you know?
I can't speak for Joe. Joe's a good guy. He's a very good guy. I worked with him when he was in the governor's office. He needs to get some religion on oil and gas drilling, certainly. But technically speaking, they have to make a decision. The SGIS, they can't say that they're going to approve it or not approve it. So legally, that's correct. He can't make a decision until they do what's called the findings of fact, and then that sets the process under which you're going to issue permits if you go there. Or conversely, say no, we think that it's not going to happen. We're not going to issue that. I can't see that happening, frankly. Yes, sir.
I kind of can answer that question for him. Martin doesn't need to come out and say when, because that'll open him up for lawsuits that he already knew before the process was completed.
Well, that's right. He just would aggravate people if he said anything. So he's taking it this way. I said this back in 2009. I did a business council presentation that this may be the greatest economic development opportunity in depressed areas of the state that we will see in our generation. And since that time, Marcellus has gotten a lot bigger than I thought back then. There will be no environmental compromises. There never was in New York, if you believe what I told you about the drilling of those wells. So that's not an issue. And this is, we're talking here maybe a 50 or 100 or 150 year supply of gas. Pennsylvania is already an exporter of gas. Unfortunately, we produce about 4% of our natural gas needs, so we import 96%.
The state of New
So,
York or the US?
pardon me?
The state of New York imports or
The
US?
state of New York.
We're the third largest user.
We produce 4% of our natural gas. 96% is imported from someplace else.
And the money goes down to Texas?
Well, that's right. The money, it really doesn't matter where you use it, it's where you produced it that counts. And of course, landowners deserve to share in the wealth, particularly in the depressed areas of the state. I got into this business, well, I shouldn't say that, but one of my main points was that I didn't see anybody speaking up for the landowners. So that's one of the reasons why I started talking to people and trying to make sure that people understood that somebody was speaking up for the landowners in the long run. With that, I'll open up for any questions you may have. Yes, sir.
There's been news out of Tioga County on propane fracking approach down there using the 1992 drilling rules. Are those companies going to need to do an individual site assessment, environmental assessment, or will they be, is that all in place under the 1992 regulations as is without having to do a site-specific environmental impact statement?
I very much doubt that they'll allow them to allow the 1992 GIS to rule that. There will be a supplemental information request, certainly. What the extent of that, whether it's a supplemental information request that will allow them to issue a permit or make them go through the total environmental impact statement process, I can't answer that. I will say I do have a conflict of interest because I'm involved with a company that treats hydrofrac water. So in the interest of full disclosure, I don't know much about this frac business other than what I read, and I don't know other than what I read on the websites and things like that. So I really don't know how effective it is and how good it is. But it's interesting, and it's an interesting conundrum for the DEC to look at that in a different light.
One more question.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for you. You said you're DEC, correct?
Well, not now.
Well-
I retired in 2001.
Okay. Will the people that will make the law here, will they investigate everything thoroughly? Because some of the untruths, well, actually, all the untruths I've seen that have been handed out by the anti-drillers, I have investigated all of the paperwork they've handed out, and everything that they've stated on the paperwork is untrue. And do we have a chance that the people, the higher-ups, will investigate everything instead of just listening to what some of these lawyers tell them?
Well, unfortunately, here's what let me back up and say that the people at the Division Mineral Resources who work for me are terrific people. We did a nationwide recruitment in 1981, 82, 83, and we hired the very best people we could from all over the country. That's an opportunity you don't really get under the civil service rules very often. Most of those people are still here. They're probably all going to retire in the next 5 years, which is another problem, but they're very, very good people. Now, do they have the sway in the department are they the ones that are responsible for all the things that are in the SJS? No, there's no question about that, but there's a lot of other people who know a lot more than they do. They think they know a lot more than they do. And what happens typically is something will show up in the paper and they throw that paper under somebody's nose and say, what about this that happened in Pennsylvania? Well, you can read anything in the paper, as you know. You can't, when you're a state agency, you have to investigate. You have to see data. You have to you can get sued by someone because you've unfairly treated those people. So they need to see evidence that there's a problem, hard evidence that there's a problem, that they've investigated, et cetera, et cetera. There are people in this state who say, I've been impacted by hydrofracking, okay, and they continue to say that. Well, I call up sometimes when I hear these things, and I want to find out what the real story is. And, invariably, well, we did a report on this, we did a full investigation, we did a report on this, we sent that report to the county health department, the county health department agrees with us, they have their own, so don't jump to the conclusion, I know you're not, but don't jump to the conclusion that DEC doesn't evaluate these things and doesn't do it right. The point is, though, that everybody's an expert at DEC and everybody's an expert on hydrofracking. They really don't know any of the people in the division. Human resources are the people that know.
Thank you.
Take a couple more, and then we will have a question and answers at the end. So we
Oh,
can-
okay.
Okay, maybe this is not an appropriate question. If not, you just say so. A lot of this that you say is technical, it's over my head, but I have kind of a simple question. Some of us who signed early, signed at very low rates, and we're being encouraged to try to get out of that lease. Do you think that's wise, or should we just stay as it is?
Well, I can't advise you on a lease matter, but, like anything else, a lease is a contract. So if you sign the lease, what we at DEC and what I've always said, I also run a landowner coalition in Tioga County, PA, and in Steuben. We always advise people to consult an attorney before you sign the lease. Always, no matter what. Understand the terms of the lease, understand the impact on your land. Once you sign the contract, unless it was under duress, whatever, that's a contract. There's nothing that anybody can do for you.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yes, ma'am.
Well, as you pointed out, the restrictions that are put in the environmental impact statement, up to 40–50% of the land, indicate that it wasn't scientifically based, that decision. So already there are political decisions being made by the Department of Environmental Conservation with regard to this, correct?
Yes. In my opinion, yes. And that includes setbacks from the New York City reservoirs. There's no evidence whatsoever to suggest that you need to have a 4-mile buffer or
And like I say,
even
the
a
whole
2-inch
process-
buffer.
And if the whole process was to limit environmental impact, but what the decisions are, the political decisions are actually creating a greater environmental impact. Is this just to appease
Yes,
certain factions?
yes.
But that is not to say that it's finished. They're still taking
Yeah.
it.
I'm stepping out of, I'm just telling you my opinion now, and I don't want anybody an environmental impact statement should have, you need to do an analysis, and you have to balance, and you balance the good against the bad. And in the case of an aquifer, for example, there is no bad. So what is the problem? Is the problem on the surface? Is it below the surface? Whatever. In the New York City watershed, the definition of a watershed is that the water will flow in that direction. If that's the edge of the watershed, it will flow towards the watershed. So, under that circumstance, if they're not concerned about the subsurface because of the casing and cementing, the only thing they can be concerned about is the surface. If everything flows away from the watershed, why do we have a buffer on the watershed? So those are the kinds of things that just don't stand up to scrutiny.
And hopefully the scientists in truth will prevail over politics.
We hope so. Yes, sir, Dr. Zagata.
One of the reasons given for excluding New York City's watershed, really upstate New York's watershed, and we let them use, is sedimentation. And you have to scratch your head because the two hurricanes last year, Irene and the follow-up, resulted in far more sedimentation.
We got to ban the hurricane.
Right, and there's no question that, you know, that the birds flying over the reservoir probably pollute the reservoir a lot more than any oil and gas company could ever do on a daily basis. I mean, these things, that's how ridiculous this thing is. To say that we need 4 miles or 7 miles, for New York City to say that they need 7-mile buffer away from the reservoir, that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. 0 cents. Yes, ma'am.
Of those recent additions, by far the largest reducer to get to that 40 to 50% availability was that grasslands. My understanding is it took out almost all of Steuben County. That one is it seems by far to be the most ridiculous of the exclusions. Might they change their mind on that, do you know?
Well, that's not an exclusion. What that says is that you need to do a 2-year study
But it effectively
before,
makes it.
and then you need to do a 3-year study after completion. So you have to spend at least $500,000, probably $1 million before you drill those areas. So those areas will be the last drilled, if at all.
Yeah.
I think that, and by the way, that's the only industry that has to do that for those areas. Not the farmer, not the forestry industry, not the rest. I didn't make myself too happy when I talked to the forest products guys, and I said the same thing to them. But I was trying to get them, like I told them, they're next, unless they get on the bandwagon and help out here. So yeah, those are very, very significant. The other one that's very significant is the 100-year floodplain. Pennsylvania, we had the flood. It isn't like this is theoretical. We had the flood. Nothing happened in Pennsylvania. They put out a report that the flood didn't affect the oil and gas wells that were in the area. You know, these are not. This is a $5 million piece of equipment. This isn't just something stuck in the ground that's going to get taken away by a flood. So, you know, when you consider that going by you are billions of gallons of water and insulation and dead animals and sewage overflow and unfortunately dead people, and you're trying to say that putting a well in a 100-year floodplain is going to cause a problem after that. I mean, it doesn't equate.
One of the things that's in there, are certain provisions that they say that they're going to revisit in 2 years or whatever. With your experience, without a definite cutoff date, a sunset clause, do you think that there's actually going to be a revisiting?
Never happened. That's just a guise to get something through. I don't want to be too negative about this. You know, I've been negative about it, and there needs to be some changes made. But the overall, you know, we want to get on with drilling in the state of New York. And maybe, just maybe, there may be some companies still interested who will stay here, who will drill some wells, maybe some of the majors, which I believe is going to happen. And maybe they'll gain some experience, and maybe they'll loosen up on some of the things. But, you know, we're talking about a huge opportunity for the state of New York, and I just don't want to see us lose that opportunity.
Thank you very much.